Dry Creek was burning. Not all of it, just enough to send black smoke curling into the bruised twilight sky like the fingers of some angry god. The Apache had come at sunset, as they always did, when the light played tricks on a man's eyes and the shadows grew long enough to hide 100 sins. They'd taken horses, supplies, and one white woman, a schoolteacher from Boston who'd arrived on the stage just 2 weeks prior, still wearing her Eastern naivete like a Sunday dress. The posse had ridden out within the hour, 20 men strong, fueled by whiskey courage and frontier justice. Samuel Bridger rode with them because that's what men did in Dry Creek. You defended what was yours, even if what was yours was just a failing cattle ranch and a barn that leaked when it rained. They'd track the war party 15 miles into the Badlands, through arroyos that cut the earth like wounds, past mesas that stood silent as tombstones. The gunfight erupted in a canyon where the walls threw echoes back and forth until a man couldn't tell his own shots from someone else's. Smoke and dust and the copper smell of blood filled the air. Horses screamed, men screamed. And when it was over, the Apache had melted into the rocks like they'd never been there at all. That's when Samuel found him. The boy couldn't have been more than 8 years old, maybe 9, crouched behind a boulder with eyes black as midnight and just as deep. He held a knife, not raised in threat, but gripped tight in his small fist like it was the only solid thing left in a world gone to chaos. His leg was bleeding, a bullet graze that painted his buckskin legging dark and wet. Samuel's rifle was already aimed at the boy's chest before his mind could catch up to his hands. For a moment, neither moved. The canyon held its breath. Somewhere in the distance, a wounded horse whinnied, the sound thin and desperate. The boy didn't cry, didn't beg, just stared at Samuel with a look that said he'd already made peace with whatever came next. Samuel's finger rested on the trigger. "Do it," something whispered in his mind. "Apache killed your brother 2 years back. Left him staked out in the sun with his eyelids cut off. This is how it works out here. This is justice." But the boy was just sitting there bleeding, with a knife he didn't know how to use, and eyes that suddenly reminded Samuel of his own son, the one buried on a hillside back in Missouri, claimed by fever before his 5th birthday. The rifle lowered an inch, then another. "Hell," Samuel muttered, the word lost in the wind that had started to pick up, carrying with it the promise of a storm. He glanced back toward where the rest of the posse was regrouping, counting their dead, arguing about which direction to ride next. They hadn't seen the boy yet. If they did, there wouldn't be any decisions to make. Hemp rope and a sturdy tree branch had a way of simplifying matters on the frontier. Samuel made his choice in the space between heartbeats. He dismounted and moved toward the boy, watching those dark eyes follow his every step. When he got close, the boy slashed with the knife, a clumsy, desperate arc that Samuel caught easily, his calloused hand closing around the small wrist like an iron manacle. "Easy now," Samuel said, his voice low and steady as gentling a spooked horse. "Easy." The boy tried to pull away, but the strength was draining out of him along with the blood from his leg. Samuel pulled his bandana free and tied it tight around the wound, ignoring the way the boy flinched at his touch. "You understand English, boy?" Samuel asked. The child said nothing, but something flickered in his eyes. Understanding, or maybe just fear. Out here, they often look the same. Samuel heard boots on stone, someone coming to investigate. He made another choice, this one faster than the first. He scooped the boy up, ignoring his struggles, and draped him over his saddle like a grain sack. The boy tried to cry out, but Samuel's hand covered his mouth. "You make a sound, they'll kill you where you lie," Samuel hissed. "I'm trying to save your damn life, so you best let me." When Bill Holloway came around the boulder, rifle at the ready, he found Samuel cinching his saddle, adjusting the blanket roll to hide the small form bundled beneath it. "Find something, Sam?" "Nothing but rock and regret," Samuel replied, swinging up into the saddle with practiced ease. "We should head back. That schoolteacher's long gone by now." Bill spat into the dust, his weathered face twisted with frustration. "Apache'll pay for this, one way or another." "Reckon they will," Samuel agreed, and turned his horse toward home. The ride back to Dry Creek took 4 hours, and every minute of it Samuel expected the boy to give him away, to struggle, to cry out, to do any of the things a captured enemy child might do. But the boy stayed silent, hidden in the folds of the blanket, still as death except for the small tremors that ran through his body. Samuel's ranch sat 3 miles outside of town, a collection of weathered buildings that had seen better days. The barn dominated the property, a massive structure his father had built 40 years prior when he'd first claimed this land. It was the only thing Samuel owned that didn't leak, crack, or threaten to fall down in a strong wind. The posse dispersed at the town limits, men peeling off toward homes and saloons, toward wives who'd worry and whiskey that wouldn't. Samuel continued alone into the darkness, following the road he could have ridden blind. When he finally reached his property, he didn't head for the house. Instead, he guided his horse straight to the barn, dismounting in the shadows where the moonlight couldn't reach. He pulled the boy down, and the child immediately tried to run, but the wounded leg buckled, and Samuel caught him before he hit the ground. "Barn," Samuel said simply, half carrying the boy inside. The interior smelled of hay and horses, leather and old wood. Samuel's mare, Juniper, snorted from her stall, curious about the midnight activity. He carried the boy to the tack room in the back, a small space lined with saddles and bridles, and set him down on a pile of horse blankets. The boy immediately scrambled to the far corner, back against the wall, eyes tracking Samuel's every movement. Samuel lit a lantern, keeping the flame low. In the amber light, he could see the boy more clearly now, the sharp features, the intelligence burning in those dark eyes, the way his chest heaved with breath he was trying to control. The bandana around his leg was soaked through with blood. "I need to clean that wound," Samuel said, reaching for the medical kit he kept in the barn. "You let me do that, or you want to bleed out? Your choice." The boy said nothing, but his hand went to the knife at his belt, except it wasn't there anymore. Samuel had taken it during the ride, probably without the boy even noticing. "Looking for this?" Samuel held up the blade, then set it deliberately on a shelf across the room. "You want it back, you earn it back. By living." He approached slowly, the way he would a wounded animal, and knelt in front of the boy. Up close, Samuel could see the exhaustion carved into the young face, the hollows beneath the eyes that spoke of too many nights without sleep, too many days running. "This is going to hurt," Samuel warned, then poured whiskey over the wound. The boy's jaw clenched so hard Samuel heard teeth grind, but the child didn't make a sound, not a whimper, not a gasp. Just breathed through the pain with the kind of control that grown men didn't have. Samuel cleaned the wound, stitched it with practiced hands that remembered too many injuries on too many battlefields, and wrapped it in clean cloth. When he finished, he sat back on his heels. "What's your name, boy?" Silence. The boy stared at him with eyes that gave nothing away. "Fine. Don't talk. But you're stuck here now. Understand? Sun comes up, you try to run, you'll die. Maybe from that leg, maybe from the men in town who'd shoot you for sport. You stay in this barn, stay quiet, and maybe, you live long enough to figure out what comes next." Samuel stood, his knees protesting. He was getting too old for this kind of foolishness. "There's water in that bucket. Dried beef in that tin. You need anything else, you're out of luck." He moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at the small figure pressed into the corner. "For what it's worth," Samuel said quietly, "I had a boy once, about your age. I know what it's like to be afraid." He left the lantern burning low and stepped out into the night, barring the tack room door from the outside. Not to keep the boy prisoner, If the child really wanted out, he'd find a way, but to keep anyone else from wandering in and finding him. Samuel walked to his house, a lonely structure that felt emptier every year, and poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey that he didn't drink. Instead, he stood at the window, looking out toward the barn, and wondered what kind of hell tomorrow would bring. He didn't have to wait long to find out. Dawn came like a reluctant guest, spreading gray light across the hard-packed earth with none of the warmth that usually followed. Samuel had been awake for hours, sitting on his porch with a cup of coffee gone cold, watching the horizon and listening to the silence that felt too heavy, too full of waiting. That's when he saw them. They came from the east, rising from the land itself like smoke taking form. 1 warrior, then 10, then 50, then more. A tide of horsemen that spread across his property line in a formation that spoke of military precision and absolute purpose. They wore paint and feathers, carried rifles and lances, and sat their horses with the kind of stillness that preceded violence. Samuel counted them as they assembled, his mouth going dry as the numbers climbed. 100, 200. More still coming, materializing from arroyos and behind rocks, from places that should have offered no cover at all. When they finally stopped moving, 300 Apache warriors sat their horses in a perfect line outside his barn, silent as judgment itself. Samuel's coffee cup slipped from his fingers and shattered on the porch boards. For a long moment, nothing happened. The warriors waited. Samuel's heart hammered against his ribs like it was trying to break free. His rifle leaned against the wall beside him, loaded and ready. But what good was 1 rifle against 300 men who'd been born fighting? Then, from the center of the line, a single warrior urged his horse forward. He was older than the rest, his face a map of years lived hard, with eagle feathers woven into his long gray hair. He wore no war paint, just the leather and silver that marked him as someone important, someone who commanded. The old warrior stopped his horse 20 feet from the porch. His eyes found Samuel's and held them with an intensity that felt physical. "You have something that belongs to us," the warrior said in English that carried only the slightest accent, his voice deep and measured as ancient stone. Samuel's throat had gone dust dry. He swallowed once, twice before he could force words out. "If you're talking about the boy, he's hurt. I patched him up. He's safe." Safe. The word hung in the air like smoke. "You take our children and speak of safety?" "I didn't take him. I found him." Samuel stood slowly, keeping his hands visible, away from the rifle. After the raid on Dry Creek, after the shooting stopped, he was bleeding, alone. "I could have left him to die, could have let the other men find him." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I didn't." "No. You brought him here, locked him away." The warrior's hand rested on the rifle across his lap, not threatening yet, but the promise was clear. "Why?" It was the question Samuel had been asking himself all night. "Because—" He stopped, started again. "Because he's just a boy. Whatever his people did, whatever my people did, he's just a boy. And I've seen enough death to last me 3 lifetimes." The old warrior studied him for a long moment. Behind him, 300 warriors waited like drawn breath, ready to release into violence at a single word. "I am called Nantage," the warrior finally said. "I lead these men, and that boy you found, he is my grandson." The words hit Samuel like a fist to the chest. Of all the Apache children in all the Badlands, he'd grabbed the grandson of a war chief. The universe had a cruel sense of humor. "I didn't know," Samuel said, which was the truth and also completely meaningless. "Would it have mattered?" Nantage asked, and there was something in his voice now, not anger exactly, but a terrible weariness. "Would you have left him to die if he'd been no one's grandson? Just another Apache child bleeding in the rocks?" Samuel thought about his own son, buried in Missouri. about how it had felt to lower that small coffin into the ground, to pile earth on top of someone who should have outlived him by 50 years. No, he said quietly, I wouldn't have. Nantaje nodded slowly, as if Samuel had passed some test he hadn't known he was taking. My grandson, his name is Nahilzai. His mother, my daughter, was killed in your raid 3 winters past. His father fell yesterday in the canyon, fighting to protect the woman you white men came to take back. Each word was a stone added to the weight already pressing on Samuel's chest. I didn't know, Samuel said again, and hated how inadequate the words sounded. There is much we do not know about those we kill. Nantaje's gaze drifted to the barn, then back to Samuel. My warriors want blood. They have lost sons, brothers, fathers. The boy you took, they see him as an excuse for war, a reason to burn this place, and your town, and everything in between. Samuel's hand twitched toward the rifle, an involuntary movement that 300 sets of eyes tracked instantly. But, Nantaje continued, raising one hand in a gesture that stilled the sudden tension, I am old. I have fought in more battles than you have seen summers, and I am tired of making widows and orphans on both sides. He paused, his weathered face grave as a carved stone. So I come here, to the man who could have killed my grandson but chose mercy instead, and I ask, why? Why did I spare him? Why do you care? We are enemies. My people raid your settlements. Your people hunt us like animals. The boy in your barn, one day he will be a warrior, and he may kill white men, may kill you. Yet you risked everything to save him. Why? Samuel looked past Nantaje to the line of warriors behind him, then to his barn where a frightened child waited, then to his hands. Hands that had killed and healed, built and destroyed, held his dying son and buried him in the earth. I had a boy, Samuel said, the words coming out rough as gravel. Nathan. He died of fever 6 years back, 5 years old, with his whole life ahead of him. He met Nantaje's eyes. When I saw your grandson bleeding in those rocks, I didn't see an Apache. I just saw a scared kid who hurt, and I thought... His voice cracked. He cleared his throat. I thought maybe I could do one good thing. Save one child, even if I couldn't save my own. The silence that followed was broken only by the wind moving through the grass, a lonesome sound that fit the moment. Nantaje dismounted. The movement sent a ripple of readiness through the warrior line, 300 men preparing for whatever came next. But the old chief simply walked forward, closing the distance between himself and Samuel until they stood face to face. You white men, Nantaje said, you come to our lands, take what is not yours, kill our buffalo, break your treaties. You are thieves and liars. This I know. Samuel said nothing. What could he say? It was all true. But you, Nantaje continued, you are also a father who grieves, and grief, I think, is the same in any tongue. He extended his hand. Show me my grandson. It wasn't a request. Samuel led Nantaje to the barn, acutely aware of the 300 warriors watching their every step. He unbarred the tack room door and pushed it open. The boy, Nahilzai, sat in the corner where Samuel had left him, but he was standing now, balanced on his good leg, holding a pitchfork he must have found somewhere. The makeshift weapon shook in his small hands, but his jaw was set with determination. When he saw Nantaje, the pitchfork clattered to the floor. Grandfather, he whispered, and suddenly he was just a child again, injured and scared and trying so hard to be brave. Nantaje crossed the space in 3 strides and knelt, gathering the boy into his arms with a gentleness that seemed impossible from a man who commanded 300 warriors. He spoke in Apache, soft words Samuel couldn't understand, but whose meaning was clear in any language. You're safe. I'm here. You're safe." Samuel turned away, giving them privacy, and found himself staring at his own trembling hands. After a moment, Nantaje stood, lifting Nahilzai easily. He carried the boy out of the barn, past Samuel, toward where his horse waited. The morning sun had finally broken through the clouds, painting everything in shades of gold that felt too beautiful for a day that should have ended in blood. At his horse, Nantaje paused and looked back. "You saved my grandson," he said. "This is a debt I cannot repay with words." "You don't owe me anything," Samuel replied. "I did what anyone should do." "But most do not." Nantaje lifted Nahilzai onto his horse, then mounted behind him, settling the boy against his chest. "The white man and the Apache. We are at war. This will not change. But you, Samuel Bridger, are not my enemy today." He raised his hand, and 300 warriors turned their horses as one, a movement so synchronized it seemed choreographed. "Wait!" Samuel called out, the word leaving his mouth before he'd thought it through. Nantaje halted his horse. Samuel walked to where the old chief sat, reached into his pocket, and pulled out something he'd been carrying for 6 years, a small carved horse, no bigger than his palm, made of wood smoothed by constant handling. His son's favorite toy. "Give this to the boy," Samuel said, holding it up. "Tell him—" He paused, searching for words. "Tell him that even when everything seems broken, sometimes people choose kindness, and that matters." Nantaje took the small horse, turned it over in his weathered hands, then tucked it carefully into his shirt. He met Samuel's eyes, and something passed between them. Not friendship exactly, but an understanding. A recognition of shared humanity in a world that tried its best to deny it. "Perhaps," Nantaje said quietly, "there is hope yet. For all of us." Then he rode away, 300 warriors flowing behind him like a river returning to its course, and within minutes they had vanished into the landscape as completely as they'd appeared from it. Samuel stood in his yard as the dust settled, watching the empty horizon, feeling the weight of the night and the morning slowly lifting from his shoulders. Behind him, his barn still stood. His house still stood. He still stood. One small choice, made in a canyon full of blood and smoke, had changed everything. Or maybe it had changed nothing at all. The wars would continue, the raids would continue, the cycle of violence that defined the frontier would grind on with or without him. But a boy was alive who should have been dead. And maybe, Samuel thought as he walked back to his porch and sat down heavily, maybe that was enough. The sun climbed higher, warming the air, burning off the morning chill. In town, Dry Creek was stirring to life, people emerging from their homes to tend to the damage from yesterday's raid, to mourn their losses and plan their revenge. But here, on a failing cattle ranch 3 miles out, Samuel Bridger poured himself a fresh cup of coffee and let it go warm in his hands while he watched the horizon and remembered a small boy with midnight eyes and a will to survive that put grown men to shame. Sometimes, he realized, redemption didn't look like winning. It looked like choosing mercy when vengeance would be easier, like seeing the humanity in an enemy's child, like recognizing that grief and love and hope spoke the same language, regardless of which side of a war you happened to be born on. The wars would continue. But today, on this patch of dust and hard-scrabble land, 300 warriors had ridden away without spilling blood. And in the grand scheme of things, Samuel thought, that was something worth living for. Thank you for staying to the end. Where are you watching from?